Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and welcome to Season 3 of State of Mind. We have the privilege and honor of having the opportunity to speak with the President and Vice Chancellor of McMaster University, President Patrick Deane. President Deane is the first standing president to serve on State of Mind. So join me as we speak with him and get his state of mind on the state of higher education. Patrick Deane, President Deane, thank you so much for joining us on Season 3 of State of Mind.
My pleasure.
Now, over the last 2 seasons, we've had the privilege of speaking to a lot of industry subject matter experts in terms of topics such as employment, sexuality, academic dishonesty, substance abuse, really covering the social, the political, the economic aspects of higher level education. It's 2016. Help our audience level set. What is the state of higher level education in Canadian universities?
I think it's often been said that Canadian universities offer, no matter where you go, a generally solid education. It's probably still true. The benefit of the Canadian system is that resources tend to be distributed on a fairly level basis, and so most universities have pretty robust quality assurance procedures, and depending on the provincial jurisdiction, they are better or worse resourced, but they're not badly resourced. The downside of that is that it's very difficult for Canadian universities to aspire to the kind of research, say, that you can see at the Ivy League schools in the States. In other words, it's very difficult to escape that homogeneous solidity, and that's the challenge that we all face. And sometimes some institutions have the benefit of a good philanthropic tradition, as we do at McMaster, and that's one of the things that helps set an institution apart. So we just this year rose 13 places in the Shanghai Jiao Tong academic rankings of world universities. I'm really pleased about that. That's challenging because it doesn't all depend on what you're doing. It depends on what's happening elsewhere in the world. And one of the things I think that's behind our ability to stay there in the top 100 has been our philanthropic tradition. We've got a number of very, very generous benefactors for the university. So I think overall, and I think higher education in the country is in a good state. It's in a confused state, though, because almost everywhere, under the influence of anxieties about the economy, is wondering whether universities, in the form in which they currently exist, are properly equipping young people to take their place in the workforce, to find or even to make their own place in the workforce. And I think that is a challenge. I'm not sure that is unique to this time, but it certainly is a major issue for Canadian universities at this point.
So heading into the second half of this decade, as we approach 2020, what does McMaster specifically need to do to ensure that it continues to be successful, not just academically, but also professionally as well?
McMaster has been a remarkable institution over the years for two things. One, extraordinary research despite our size. We're small by comparison with some of the other Canadian universities in the top 100, but we do $320 million of sponsored research a year here, which is second only to the University of Toronto in this province. And research continues to be a mainstay for the university, but equally we're famous for our pedagogical innovations, problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning as well. And we need to continue to build on that tradition. I think the wonderful challenge for our university is to bring those two things together. So an undergrad education here has always contained an element of research, self-directed research. I think we're moving towards a higher level of integration of research in undergrad learning as well. And I think that will be very empowering for students in that you can begin to use different kinds of environments for learning, not just the lab, but sometimes the social lab in experiential and service learning, that sort of thing. So McMaster does need, I think, to continue to pursue those two strands, but in their interwoven way. while being, I think, very clear-sighted about what it is that young people nowadays need. For some places in the workforce, they may need a technical education, but that is not what they're going to get here, despite the extraordinary strength here in engineering and in the professions. We offer that kind of education, but framed in a much bigger philosophical way. And I think that is really important for young people who, by the time they graduate from here, have a life expectancy of another 60 years. And what I'm embarking on, my 6 decades, I would want to be prepared to do many things over that time rather than just one technical thing which may become redundant as technology progresses anyway.
Makes sense. So let's continue on that train of thought. The entire theme of State of Mind has always been based on the analogy that a university is somewhat like a corporation, where the president is like a CEO, the deans are like vice presidents, the students are like consumers, and the college degree is like a stock certificate. First of all, do you agree with that statement? And secondly, how do you see yourself in managing not just the academic standards of this university, but also the business aspect of it as well?
Well, that's a very complex question. So I'll allow the analogy, if I can put it that way, because of the scale of these places. This institution has a complete budget, all included, of around $1 billion a year. So this is a very, very significant organization in size and scope and complexity. So I think it is like any other big business at one level, requiring the same care, the same controls, the same ethical standing, and so on. On the other hand, it's radically different from many corporations in the way in which it operates, so that I, as president, might appear to have power. I don't really have much. I have the power of influence. But as you know, I mean, the governance structure of this and most universities is actually way more level than the organizational structure of a corporation would tend to be. So Senate is important, the Board of Governors is important. The deans who you mentioned as sort of vice president parallels, yeah, they do have that function, but they have a freedom to criticize, to advise, and to challenge the direction of the university from this office, which I find very healthy. I'm a creature of the university. I'm comfortable in that milieu. But I think that must be the area, now this is a generalization about corporations, in which universities very significantly diverge from the corporate model. Also, universities don't just do one thing. I mean, it looks, research and teaching, yes, fine. Then there are all kinds of subcategories under those. But institutions like this are extremely complex. We're not about producing a single product and selling it, marketing it in the best way. Then just to your other point about students as consumers, well, students have rights. And that is something one recognizes more than would have been the case when I was an undergrad, say, when you were just supposed to suck it up and whatever the university dished out was good for you. The exciting thing about university now is that much of the change that one wants to see is driven by the students. The students instigate it, they demand it, they have great ideas, they encourage us to accommodate those ideas. So I think it minimizes their significance and impact to just call them consumers, because they are partners with the professoriate and administrators like me in shaping their own education and shaping the kind of institution this is going to be. Some of the best stuff we've done over the last 5 years in teaching innovation has been driven by students. Students have participated in it. So it's not simply a matter of us offering a a parchment for which they pay, and our obligation is to make sure that it's got a credible trademark on it. It's not that at all. I mean, the degree certainly is currency for students, but it's the strength of the currency is only as good as the institution is strong, and an institution to be strong has to be really skilled at those kind of democratic governance processes and that sort of thing.
You've given me a lot to think about in terms of that analogy going forward. One of the beautiful things about Southern Ontario, as someone who grew up in Hamilton and went to McMaster University, is the diversity on campus. You see students from all different backgrounds and races. How important is diversity to you from a faculty, staff, and administration standpoint, and how does McMaster fare versus other universities?
It's hugely important. So I would agree with you completely about the diversity of the student body. We really do have a wonderfully rich ethnic and cultural mix of students, and that's as it should be. I see no reason at all why the faculty and the staff and administration of the university should not reflect the same diversity. Where does McMaster stand right now? Well, we launched just last year an equity and diversity initiative, and we, like most Canadian universities, are lagging a bit behind, I would say, the student body. And this is a sector issue, because if you look only, for example, at the place of women in the professoriate, the point has often been made that things like the Canada Research Chairs in the first round are almost completely filled by men. And then you can legitimately point to the pipeline, right? So where are the senior women? Well, they are moving up the ranks, and increasingly you could expect to see easily a balance between men and women in those most senior academic ranks. It's gone slower than it should have, for all kinds of complex reasons that are sort of predictable. But then the same applies, I think, to ethnic and racial and cultural diversity too. If you look at Indigenous Canadians, I think it's critical that we hire more Indigenous faculty members. The question is, the number of Indigenous scholars in the country with the appropriate academic qualifications is growing, but it's not growing in a kind of direct proportion to the need. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done. There are aspects to our approach to equity and inclusion that I'm very proud of, but others that I think require very focused attention over the next little while. If we're going to make a difference in the short term really does matter.
Very good. One of the recurring themes in Season 1, Season 2, and definitely in Season 3 of State of Mind, and it's a topic that's close to my heart, is that on mental wellness. The pressures, the needs, and the expectations on today's students is more so than I can ever imagine. I can't even begin to want to go back to school at this day and age and expect to succeed the way I would want to. How important is it for a university, one, to address mental wellness? We've seen more and more awareness over the last several years, and what type of measures are McMaster putting into place?
Well, I certainly agree that mental health has become a huge issue among students. It would appear, if you listen to people, suddenly that this is a phenomenon of the last 5 or 6 years. I think students are feeling pressure more acutely than they were. I also think we are now open to talking about it in a way we weren't always. So what looks like a sudden explosion may be just that we now can see and talk about what has been there to some degree. So McMaster's, 2 years ago, we embarked on a special mental wellness initiative, and a great deal of careful thought and attention and resources has been put into putting in place the right kind of mental health supports for our students at all levels. I think we've made a lot of progress on that. The area in which I think universities are not so good is in asking what we do to contribute to the stresses. So, you're right. Young people today do feel a lot of pressure, and a lot of it comes from outside of the university. As you and I were saying earlier on, the culture at large cannot but make students anxious about their futures. And you come into university with the sense that this is something you have to do because potentially life will be disastrous if you don't, and you've got to achieve certain kinds of results. So I feel terribly sorry for students who, I believe, partly because of the economic pressures outside and the way in which families have adopted this, and governments, this way of talking about them. I feel very sorry for students and the pressure they feel, and I'm certain that that is contributing to the evidence that there is this surge in mental health issues among students. At the same time, I was at a conference in Toronto where all the universities got together to talk about this about 4 years ago. And all the talk was of addressing the symptoms. None of the talk was about what we do to contribute to this. So what is it about a university course of study that seems to provoke breakdown or mental illness of one sort or another? Well, there are lots of things. We can all see them. There's the workload issue. Perhaps students carry too much. Perhaps it's structured in a way that's conducive to anxiety rather than to slow, thoughtful, deep learning. So that's, to me, putting the measures in place to address the symptomatic side of this is critically important, and we've been doing it, and we'll continue to strengthen what we're doing there. But that's not sufficient. I think to the extent to which a university contributes to mental stress, as distinct from intellectual challenge, there are things we need to do. There's a new book recently out called The Slow Professor. This is by a professor at Queen's called Maggie Berg, and it tries to bring the principles and values of the slow movement, slow food, etc., to education, to say there's a different way of doing this from the way in which you or I experienced undergrad life.
So let's take that thought, and from your position as the president of this university, what advice would you give to current students as they start school and to potential future students about managing all the expectations and the expectation that this is going to be the next 4 to 6 to 10 years of their life, depending on how far they spend their time in higher education?
Well, I think it's a sort of a trite observation, but it's, I think, still valid, and that is that there's only one reason for coming to a place like this, and that is to enlarge yourself as a human being, to take those further steps along the course to realizing your potential. And to working through something that you're interested in, that you love, or that drives you. A lot of people come to university because it's expected of them. A lot of people come because they're told to by their parents, or because they believe certain stats about employment, and so on and so forth. There are many reasons people come to university. The main one, I believe, needs to be to come here in order to find fulfillment for yourself, which may be in a particular line of work. It might be in commerce, but it also might be in archaeology or in literature. And that is the first goal. How you then turn that that enlarged self to a career, and through a career to the benefit of society and the economy. That's further down the road. I think a university education needs to be about that growth of the individual. Now, some people who are very clear on their career plans can come straight into med school or into engineering, and what I just said is in no way to be critical of them, because that is their goal, and they will find fulfillment through doing that. But for the majority of students, it really needs to be about exploring possibilities through which you might find fulfillment and personal growth.
Very quickly, last question, one-word response. What advice would you give parents of college students?
Can I use 2 words? Chill out.
Well said. Well, on that note, President Deane, thank you so much for the time and
not
helping
at
us
all.
kick off Season 3 of State of Mind.
Lovely to chat.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
That'll wrap up our show for today. If you like what you saw in today's episode, please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe on the various social media platforms at the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.